Hey everyone! If you saw my micro power station video, you know how much I love the Anker 737. So when the Anker 548 went on sale on Amazon Prime Day, I had to pick it up. It looks like a larger version of the 737, but with LFP battery chemistry and more than double the battery capacity at 192 watt-hours. It also adds a 60-watt solar input, extra USB-A port, and cool lantern design. On paper, it seems like a home run. Unfortunately, Anker made a bunch of puzzling design decisions that make this a real miss for me. In this video, I'll tell you why I'm probably returning it. The Anker 548 Power Core Reserve is about as large as 4 737s strapped together, and then some. It packs 2.25 times the battery capacity at 192 watt-hours versus 84 watt-hours with the 737. It uses less energy-dense LFP battery cells, but it's a bit bulkier than I expected. On the front, there's a color display, 2 buttons, 2 USB-C ports, 2 USB-A ports, and an XT60 solar input. I thought the display would be similar to the 737, but it turns out to be much more basic. It shows you the total input and output and time to empty or full, like a typical power station, which is good, but the 737 shows you how much power is used on each individual USB port, which is very helpful to see what's going on. It's also lacking any of the additional data the 737 shows, like cycle count, temperature, and doesn't have any settings. On top, there's an interesting lantern design that can be expanded up like a Goal Zero crush light, and the tall shape helps to disperse the light. However, they went with a cool light temperature around 4000 Kelvin that isn't very appealing. I much prefer the warmer 3000 Kelvin light like this Goal Zero micro lantern uses. It has high and low levels, but I really wish you could dim it to any level by holding the power button down to dial in the brightness like I can on the Goal Zero. Next, the button design is strange. There's a giant SOS button that you'll probably never use, and meanwhile the left button is overloaded with features to control the display and lantern, so I find myself accidentally turning the lantern on when trying to toggle a display. There's a heavy-duty woven carrying handle that's quite nice, and there's glow-in-the-dark stickers on the side to find it at night. There's grills on the side for airflow, but I've never heard a fan. It's worth noting that the plastic case is an army green color, not the gray I expected, but I think it looks pretty cool. So far, these are small complaints, I know, but Anker really cut a lot of corners on the USB ports, which is the entire point of this power bank. The much smaller 737 supports PD 3.1, so it can power devices up to 140 watts and also recharge at 140 watts from its USB-C ports. For some reason, this much larger unit is limited to 60 watts of output per port and can only charge at 60 watts as well, whether through the XT60 port or USB-C. And you can't use both at once to charge even faster. Now, I knew these limitations when I bought this, but things were much worse as I started testing. First of all, you can't charge a low draw device like an Apple Watch because the ports will shut off after 15 minutes because it only pulls 1 to 2 watts. The 737 can power it just fine. There are 2 USB-C power delivery ports. C1 is for input and output, and C2 is just for output. I plugged in my MacBook Pro 15-inch and it charged at 60 watts from either USB-C port, but when I connected a second USB-C laptop, the max output I could pull was 80 watts total. Plugging in all 4 USB ports at once gave me the same 80 watt output, so that's the absolute max this can output. For comparison, the smaller 737 can output well over 120 watts across its 3 ports. But things are much worse than that. I noticed that if I was using all the ports and happened to unplug the C1 cable, the output would crash from 70 to 80 watts down to below 20 watts. Now, what I figured out by reading the fine print in the manual is if you use the C2 port and one or both of the USB-As, the max you can output is 20 watts total across all 3 ports. In fact, it's more like 10 watts for the C2 port and 5 watts for each USB-A port, because if you connect C2 and a single USB-A, you only get 15 watts. To be clear, using the C1 port with USB-A ports will give you up to 80 watts combined, so it's some sort of strange limitation only with the C2 port. This becomes a huge problem when charging because you need to use the C1 port for input. That means that when charging, you can either use the remaining C2 port to output up to 60 watts or use the USB-A ports, but if you combine both, you're limited to 20 watts max output. That's ridiculous. The 737 doesn't have any of these strange limits, and it really reduces the usefulness of this product. When I used the C1 port, I was able to recharge at the 60 watt rating, but for this size battery that means a slow 3.5 hour charge time. For comparison, the 767 can recharge in less than an hour. Fortunately, pass-through charging did work, so I could charge my laptop at 60 watts while recharging on the other port at 60 watts, so at least that works. Instead of using USB-C to charge, you could use the XT60 port to connect a solar panel that's 10 to 24 volts at 3 amps for a max of 60 watts. I tested charging with this 60 watt SunJack panel and saw up to 50 watts peak. I did find that the 24 volt limit was really tricky because a lot of my panels were around 25 volts. So if you do solar charge with the XT60 connector, then things work a bit better because you can use all 4 USB ports and get up to 80 watts of output. But for wall or car charging, this thing is extremely limited. In the end, I think this is a deeply compromised product that could have been incredible, and it's merely okay. I really like the idea of a compact LFP-based power station focused on USB output, but Anker cut way too many corners on this unit to hit a price point. It's frustrating to know that if they use the same front end as the 737, this could be a game-changing device. Let's hope Anker comes out with a version 2 with better input and output, stronger solar charger, and dimmable light with a warmer color temperature. Well, I hope this helps you make a better purchase decision because I haven't seen any of these issues mentioned by other reviewers. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Till next time.